Hello, my name is Afsaneh Beschloss. I'm founder and CEO of RockCreek, and I'm delighted to be here with Dr. Alan Greenspan and with Dr. Liaquat Ahamed today to talk about what is going on in the markets. And happy birthday, Alan.
Thank you. I don't feel a day over 93.
Wonderful, wonderful. So, Alan Greenspan, Dr. Greenspan does not need an introduction. Of course, a lot of questions to ask you given what's going on with the Fed policies, with fiscal issues and what's going on in the economy. And similarly, very, very fortunate to have Liaquat Ahamed, who has not only been the Pulitzer-winning author of a very important historical book, Lords of Finance, but also has been a bond manager a long time ago in his life, but worked at the World Bank and ran Fisher Francis, which is one of the largest, most important fixed income groups in the world. So very, very excited to be with both of you today. There is a lot going on in the markets, obviously.
We've noticed.
You did notice. And every day when we wake up, there is additional news. And I was curious to know, Alan, starting with you, what you think is going on and how much more pain are we going to see looking forward into the economies and the markets?
I'm glad you asked the simple questions first. I think the best way to look at this is that the virus is essentially a triggering mechanism, and it obviously creates major uncertainty. And it's the uncertainty of what the virus is engendering that's creating market chaos. But the one thing that's important about it is a fading development. China is virtually now clean of the virus, and it suggests that we in the United States who are just developing it don't have to look to an indefinitely rising. The fact that it's limited is a critical issue in market evaluations, because then we go back to what we're used to dealing with. And the book will close on this, but not right away. The fact that it will close rather than expand well beyond any conceptual moment is largely ruled out by the Chinese experience.
Right.
So I think that's a minor issue as the periods go on, but we have enough to be concerned about that if we're worried that our capacity to worry is not being employed, forget it. You get a significant increase in medical technology. When I was young, for example, penicillin didn't exist.
Right.
And our family doctor used to, examine me and say, take an aspirin and I'll see you in the morning. I mean, they had no things, they had sulfur drugs during the World War II, which were barely able. It wasn't until the critical drug expansion at the end of World War II, penicillin being a critical one, these are hugely changing the economic pattern of the United States with a wholly new industry.
I completely agree with Alan that this is a shock, but a limited shock, and we can sort of delineate the dimensions of that shock, right, which means that it's going to affect the economy badly for 2 months, 3 months, not for 2 years or 3 years. In a year's time, we'll have a vaccine, or a year and 18 months. So we've got to get through a limited shock. Do we have any experience? We've had swine flu in 2009. That was swamped by the global financial crisis. But that gives us a sort of order of magnitude of what the shock might be like. The numbers that I've seen suggest that it's going to take the global economy from growing at 2.5% to 3% to 0 for the next year. That's bad, but not as bad as the global financial crisis, where the global economy shrank by 2.5%. So it's going to be half as bad as 2008. Stock market was down 50% then, so the stock market's going to go down 25% this time. We're already down. So,
they heard you talking in advance.
Exactly.
well, the great thing about financial markets is they're forward-looking, and they're smarter than all of us. So we're probably 2/3 of the way through the financial dimension. I suspect there are a couple of more shoes to fall. Whenever markets move very quickly, someone was on the wrong side, and I would suspect that we will have a couple of major financial crises type events before it's all over. And I think you can see that. You can see some of that in the way the bond market's moving. That there's this dramatic flight to safety. The Fed acted very aggressively.
I was going to ask you, what do you think of that action at that point in time?
I think the Fed figured out that, one, this was going to get worse. So, my view is if we're headed to a recession, rates will go down to 0.
Because Larry Summers was talking about it should have been 25% because we're getting rid of our weapons in our arsenal.
Yeah, I've never quite understood the, hoarding your weapons. Just use them.
When you're in a crisis.
Yeah, when you're in a crisis, use them. I don't see any value, and the bond market certainly sees no value in the Fed going slow.
So you're a historian as well as having participated in the markets. Have we seen this kind of rates?
Well, we've never seen these kinds of rates. We've seen shocks.
Right.
1990, Iraq invades Kuwait, oil prices spike, the stock market goes down 20% in the space of 3 weeks. Does anyone remember it now? So, we get over these
It's a vague
shocks.
memory, right.
Yeah. So that's the sort of magnitude of the financial shock.
But are the rates telling you something different?
Well, the rates are telling you that we're going to get a recession and the Fed is going to 0, right?
And what that has meant is that, we have the 30-year Treasury bond. 30-year Treasury bond was yielding a reasonably high percentage. And then all of a sudden, it broke down on the downside. And I suspect, but cannot prove obviously, that a goodly part of this is the basis of people who are recognizing increasingly that they need annuities out there. Annuities of a AAA quality. People who own gold almost invariably have a cost of holding it, which is the storage or something of that sort, and its yield is 0. And so it's got a negative yield.
Right.
And I always find that, substituting Swiss franc for gold or things like that gives you kind of, it lends the notion of what it is that's happening in the negative interest rate area. Everybody's going berserk. We've been living with one for generations. The price of gold adjusted per unit of goods and services is almost flat, going back to the beginnings of the gold standard.
Alan's point that for safe assets, that you have to actually pay money historically for the safest asset, and that you don't get it for free, is spot on. And the safe asset used to be gold, now it's treasury bonds, and as a consequence, it's not out of the bounds of all thinking to believe that negative interest rates are going to be with us for a while. So
a while meaning years?
10 years.
It's when the perceived market value of the cumulative coupons plus the repayment at maturity, that is what the number is that you start with, and that will lead you, under certain conditions, with a negative interest rate.
But do you see them cutting 75 basis points?
Within, not in the next meeting, but within the next 3 months, yes. I see them going to zero.
Which is a complete deviation from what was expected.
Yeah, but they didn't expect a recession.
Right.
Last recession, we went to zero, and we stayed there for several years. So we'll do that again. We'll go to zero and stay there for a couple of years.
But then this coronavirus has a longer term impact than other things that caused a 20% correction.
If we get a vaccine
right.
within a year, or 18 months, I actually don't think the coronavirus. We've had swine flu.
Right, but
we've had other flus.
But not this kind of impact on the economy.
Short run.
Global economy.
Yeah.
And also 20 years ago, we were not so interconnected.
South Korea, look at how South Korea has reacted to the coronavirus. Right. They have more hospitals per person. They have trebled the number of hospitals per person than Italy.
Now, what does that say about emerging markets? Because the interesting thing is when we look at the market corrections over the last few weeks, in fact, emerging markets as a group have done better than Europe and the US, and China certainly. The numbers coming out of China have been really strong, relatively. Again, on a relative basis. Obviously, there could be some level of manipulation, but even putting that aside, isn't that different than in previous recessions?
It tells you the way to control this virus in the short run is through quite authoritarian means, and locking down one whole province.
Right.
Is a pretty drastic thing, and the Chinese were not scared to do it, and that's why I think they've got it under control. Now, are we willing to do that?
They're out of it. As far as they no longer have active.
The number of new people getting it is falling very dramatically. But that takes me sort of to another point. Just like the Chinese in the last 20 years built this huge infrastructure of roads and airports and buildings and invested in technology, do we see, given how they are good in reacting and trying to jump ahead, going back to what you said earlier with the health sector and technology, they will now put in huge resources into the health sector. They already were expanding the size of the health sector, but this crisis has shown how weak their health sector is. But between their interest in bringing technology into health and the weaknesses, will the next 20 years be sort of building China into a juggernaut on health?
Yeah, I think this has probably highlighted some pretty drastic weaknesses in China's health care. So the first thing they might do is close those wet markets, but that would be a favor to all of us
before they spend any money on technology.
Yeah, but they need more hospitals and more beds, and I go back to South Korea. I am so impressed. They have tested 150,000 people. The Italians have tested 40. We have tested until last Friday, 2,000.
2,000, absolutely.
I mean, that's, the South Koreans have shown what it takes.
What
and
can be done.
Yeah, I mean, they do have a major outbreak, and they do have deaths, but they've got it under control. So I think they've shown us what it takes to get it under control.
They did it quietly.
Yes.
Right.
And the Italians made a few,
Right.
shall we say, explosions.
Right.
So we can safely move to fiscal policy, where you can both comment.
Right.
And we talked about the 8.2 billion that
Right.
that went through the Congress. But you were talking earlier about 1990 and the financial crisis in 2008. I think we spent, over 1.5 trillion.
Right.
Now, that was a very different circumstance, different situation, but this is hitting a lot of people in a very short time. So 8.2 billion doesn't go very far.
No.
So what do you think on the fiscal side will happen? Will it happen also in time to help or hinder the election in one way or another?
I think the recession probably started yesterday. So, I would be...
Central Standard Time.
Right. So, it's probably not going to solve the problem of the recession, and we're going to have automatic stabilizers kick in, so the deficit's going to go up. Will it get us out of the recession? I don't know. I don't know whether they'll feel compelled, particularly given the political divisions and given that we're going into an election year. It's hard for me to see.
About the Federal Reserve?
Or no, just the Congress.
Sorry, the Congress.
Whether
the two sides will...
Will we get a stimulus package? And how large will it be? And, I just don't think the sort of level of cooperation to get a stimulus package through will exist. But I don't think we actually we don't need the sort of package that we had in 2008, because then we needed to stabilize the banking system, and I don't think we're having a run on the banking system. In fact, I think banks are in reasonable shape.
The politics are changing, and I think the inexorable... Well, just take a look at the budgets. The entitlements are growing faster than the economy. Why? Because people are looking for ways, in Congress, for example, of buying votes. This is the simplest way. Is what do? You get a bill in the House or the Senate, and you get it passed. Why? Because rising deficits don't matter until they trigger inflation. Rising deficits have a very considerable attraction to a congressperson or a senator because it's no cost, seemingly. And indeed, if there's no inflation coming from it, there is no cost to the economy, apparently. Well, good luck for us. We have had a very protracted period of very low, stable interest rates with very large government deficits. History suggests that does not go on without difference.
But I think I take your point that the one thing that no one expects and the thing that would totally surprise everyone is if we had some sort of resurgence of inflation.
Mm-hmm.
You could sort of see, probably not in a recession, but as we came out, productivity growth is terrible. I saw one statistic, productivity growth in Britain has been lower than the lowest level since the Industrial Revolution. It's astounding. You basically have to go to the 1780s to see
look
this
at that.
level of productivity growth. So, I cannot imagine that doesn't eventually lead to some sort of cost pressures and inflation, particularly when wages are beginning to rise at 4% and you've got such low productivity growth. So, and I would think that is going to be a major problem for the stock market in the long run.
Now, look at Alan's number. I think if I remember correctly, Ireland looked very healthy in there, right?
Oh, yeah.
Ireland is one of the...
That's because they got a phony. We don't have output per hour anyway.
Right.
But we have output per person.
Per person. Yeah. I mean, these are sort of astoundingly low numbers.
Across the board.
Right.
Any surprises?
And the reason is that there is no yet, we haven't seen inflation yet. When we see inflation, then everyone will get, shall we say, a move in a different direction politically.
So what is impressive here is China is 6.7%.
Right.
The China GDP went to zero change for the first quarter, first time ever.
Right.
Because remember, they would do,
They close down, if you close down a tenth
Everything.
of your economy, you're not surprising, I suppose.
And then how about the supply chain also feeding into what you were saying, Liaquat? Because if there are big shifts in supply chains,
that's
if
costly.
the ingredients for the
Right.
medication is not coming through, or
Right,
for
yeah.
parts, or
And
for your
that
phones,
puts pressure on costs, yeah.
and that could create
Yep.
two possible forces. One is relocation of some of these to Mexico or to other countries in Asia, but also potentially inflationary.
Yeah. I mean, I would also highlight the fact that low productivity growth in this country and in Western Europe is going to... Low productivity growth in Western Europe is sort of discounted in markets. The problem in the US is we have had an over-optimistic view develop of our capabilities over the last decade. And so this, you compare the US stock market with emerging markets or other developed markets outside. This has been the decade of the US, and in part led by FANGs, but it also in part because we sort of assumed that we could deal, that we had high profits. If that starts eroding, you ask, why does China or emerging markets, why has their stock market reacted better than ours? Mm-hmm. We were overpriced. So valuation at some point
Does
kicks
matter.
in. When you have PEs of, in the mid-20s, that's going to hurt you at some point, and I think we're seeing that now.
So we needed a crisis.
We needed a crisis to wake us all up.
Right.
And emerging markets have essentially been flat for 10 years.
Right.
At a time when we've had 6-7%, excluding the FANGs, 6-7% returns.
And it will be interesting to see if that changes.
Right.
Moving into the next 10 years.
Yeah.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Liaquat. And many thanks to our audience for joining us today. We look forward to many more of these discussions. And happy birthday, Alan.